So this is now the end of January 2025, and at the end of May, I'll be going to London MCM Comic Con. One of my cos plans is to do Otohime from One Piece. She wears a kimono, at least that is visible from the top, then a obi, and the bottom half is some kind of smooth skirt that is not really a skirt that I've found references in traditional Japanese clothing. But because the top half is a kimono, I'll do a full-length kimono, but I wanted to do things right and also make the undergarments that you would normally wear under a kimono. I've done a lot of research, and by research, it's been a lot of watching most of Billy Matsunaga's videos. She has a treasure trove of just tutorial on how to sew things or how to wear things or just the cultural aspect of kimono wearing, because she's a certified teacher on how to wear a kimono. The only thing that I would nitpick on is the fact that it's not always clear when she's sewing something on what the measurements are or why they are the way they are. I had to do a bit more research because I am not your typical Japanese build. I had to really try figure out how to make the patterns that I found fit me. So today I'm going to be talking about the Suso yoke, the Datemaki, and the Hadagi. These are the three first layers. You would be normally wearing the Hadagi, which is the top against your skin. Then you'd have the Suso yoke, which is a kind of a wrap skirt. And the Datemaki is some kind of bra. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Hadagi. I've made mine out of a very lightweight cotton because I'm going to be wearing this at the end of May. It's going to be boiling with all the layers I have. But the first one I made, way too small, indecent. Because I followed the tutorial, that is a Japanese tutorial that I managed to Google Translate. The step-by-step on how to sew this, dead easy. It's only 2 panels, it's 3 seams, and then just hems. That's it. But where I tripped up was based on the measurements, because I thought that some measurements that I followed were just arbitrary measurements that are not necessarily related to the body, and they weren't. So I had to do it again. So this is the pattern that I found online. It's really easy. It's only going to be 2 pieces of fabric. The FSA is going to be for double fold seam allowance, and here the FSSA is for French seam allowance. You do it to your preference, it doesn't matter. The length, if you cut it on the fold, will have to be the shoulder to hip bone plus your double fold seam allowance. If you decide to do it in a long strip, you would just take that shoulder to hip bone plus seam allowance and multiply it by 2. And you want 2 pieces. So something I had a problem with for my first try was the width. I just did it too small. What worked for me is to have a front overlap measurement. You essentially just need to measure from the side of your torso to 3/4 of the way to the other side of the torso. The other arbitrary measurement was the bottom of the neckline, because the neckline goes at an angle and then goes straight down until the hem, and the tutorial calls for 21 centimeters. Based on the calculation that I made based on what the tutorial had, the 21 on 52 centimeters works out as about 40% of the whole length. If you feel like 21 centimeters might be just too small and you're gonna have a very plunging neckline despite the overlap, you can just work it out to take your shoulder to hip bone length and take 40% of that, and then your 40% will be from the hem to the bottom of the neckline. So when you have then your fabric unfolded and you take it from 10 centimeters on the fold and then down, that second point will be 40% from the edge. I hope that makes sense. Arbitrary measurements that worked for me but might need adjusting for you. The neckline starts at 10 centimeters away from the edge and is 4 centimeters deep. I'd suggest to start with this, to cut that out as is, sew the back and sew the side together so you have a piece. And before you hem the neckline, try it on and see if you actually need a bit wider or a bit deeper. You might not need to change the 4 centimeters because you shouldn't see your Hadagi when you're wearing the kimono the feminine way, where you have that gap behind your neck, but you're gonna pull that garment down your back. It's not gonna be 4 centimeters away from your neck. It's gonna be as much as you pulled it down. Another measurement that you might need to change is for the sleeve. The tutorial calls for 21 centimeters. However, depending on the size of your arms, that just might not be comfortable. So what I did is I took one of my t-shirts that I feel comfortable in, not the skin tight type, but the more kind of loose fitting type. I laid it flat and I measured from the top till the bottom to get my sleeve depth. and then you just add the seam allowance to make sure you don't make it tighter when you sew it up. And you want 2 pieces. You'll fold them again in half and stack them on top of each other to then cut your extra fabric here, because that will be your sleeve and that will be the indent. Then you would open them again, stack them unfolded, and then you would cut the neckline. In terms of putting it all together, when you have your second piece, it's 1 French seam at the back that you have with the other, folding it, and 1 French seam on one side and 1 French seam on the other side. And that is it. I had the selvage on mine, so I didn't do a hem at the bottom, but otherwise, if you don't have a selvage, you can just do a double fold seam allowance. For the neckline and the sleeve, the tutorial calls for a double fold hem, but I just used bias tape because my fabric was just too flimsy. So next is going to be the Datemaki. Billy Matsunaga has a really good tutorial that really, again, simple to sew, because it is just a very long strip that you're gonna fold the seam allowance in and then fold in third. I'll be linking her tutorial down. It's so easy. She explains it very well on the process. However, she's not necessarily expanding on why the measurements that she uses are the way they are. In her video, when she shows how to put the Datemaki on, she manages to do 3 full wraps, essentially, of the Datemaki. She wraps it once and twice, and by the time she tries to tie the thing, both ends are meeting, so completing a third round around her torso. Mine is not there. In her video, she has a 2.5 meters length for the Datemaki. Considering the 3-time wrapping, I would say just take your chest measurement and multiply this by 3. That should be able to have the proper length. As for the width, the 15 centimeters is fine. However, if you have a larger chest, it might just not be enough. If you think about it, 15 centimeters will be at the top, and then you have a bit of an overlap where it goes under. So that's a bit less than 30 centimeters of coverage. That might not be good enough for some people. So what I would suggest is to use the tape measure, go above your chest, and go down until where you feel you would need the coverage to be, while making sure that the tape measure is pressing against your chest, as the Datemaki will have that pressure. And then that measurement that you get, just divide it in 2, and then that would be your final Datemaki width. And because the Datemaki is folded in 3, you then take that measurement you took, multiply it by 3, and then add seam allowance on each side. Again, the how to sew, Billy Matsunaga's tutorial is perfect. It's more like the measurement side of things. Finally, the Suso yoke. I found 2 ways of making it. One way that has a full tutorial on how to make, and the other one I just deducted on how to make it based on a bit of the tutorials and a frame of Billy Matsunaga showing her Suso yokes. First, the fabric choices. Billy Matsunaga's video on how to make a Suso yoke, it was all about what to wear when you want to wear a kimono in winter. So she used flannel to make it warmer. I'm going to be wearing mine at the end of May when it's usually very hot. So I use the same fabric I use for the Hadagi, which is very lightweight. As long as your top fabric is sturdy for piece A, you should be fine. You put whatever you want on the bottom. So I made a mock-up of the Suso yoke when I was trying to follow the Japanese tutorials, just to make sure I understood the construction. Then I tried to figure out the measurements. So this is the more traditional way your Suso yoke should look. This is not the one I went for because I wanted a trim at the end. But if you want the traditional one, you would have the long strip at the top and then a long panel, or if you have multiple panels, you just French seam them together. Then you have 2 identical panels on each side. So you essentially end up with these. The first panel, the one that's going to go around your waist, 2 of these on each side, sewn into this panel, and then these 3 will then be sewn into A. So if we start with panel A, this will not change regardless of which version you're going to make. This is always going to be like this. For your width, you would want your widest point circumference. So for me, it's going to be the low hip. It might be your hip, or it might be your waist, or it might be anything. Just your widest point for your lower half of your body. And you would want to then multiply this by 1.5 because you don't necessarily want it to meet just like this. You want an overlap that is about the whole front, an extra half. If you're like me, where your widest point is a huge difference from the waist, you're going to have a bit of bunching up at the top. I didn't find too much of a problem with it because I can just refold the extra down. But if it really is a problem for you, I think it should be okay to add darts. For some reason, in Billy Matsunaga's tutorial, the darts are on this one. That seam is at the widest point. So that means that the darts are only just making this narrower as opposed to the bottom. But if you really have a difference, I would say add the darts at the top. So for your total width, you would need your widest measurements times 1.5, but you need to add your double fold seam allowance. Again, whatever you prefer. For the height, you will need to measure from your waist to your ankles to get the total height of your final garment. But for the piece A, you will need to take that whole length that you just measured and remove 70 centimeters, because the bottom half in the tutorials I found was 70 centimeters, and that seemed to be an arbitrary length, not one that was related to your body. For the bottom seam allowance, you need 1 centimeter. And for the top, you will need your double fold seam allowance. On this top double fold seam allowance, you might want it, if you use, for example, twill tape as your straps, to have it be twice the width of your twill tape. For me, I just used bias tape, so it was just ended up being a centimeter wide. So that means that your total length for piece A before you cut is going to be your double fold seam allowance, your measured length minus the 70 centimeters, that's going to be the rest of the garment, plus a 1 centimeter seam allowance for the bottom. So that's piece A. Piece B changes based on which way you're doing it. For the traditional way, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be narrower than your A piece, because you're going to have 2 of the piece C that are going to be on each side. So for the width of piece B, you're going to have your 1.5 measurements that we talked about. So your widest point measurement times 1.5, but you remove 10 centimeters because the 10 centimeters are going to be added by your piece C on each side. Then you add a 2 and 2 centimeters for each side, so 4. So you will have your 1.5 width minus 10 plus 4. For the height, you need 0.5 centimeter at the top of the seam with A, and then you would want 11 centimeters at the bottom, because you're going to fold and fold like this, and that's how the bottom is hemmed, and 70, which means that piece B in the traditional way has a arbitrary length of 0.5 plus 70 plus 10 plus 1, which is 81.5 centimeter long. Then if you again use this method, you will need 2 of these, 1 for each side, where you're gonna have your 0.5, the same as the top, plus your 70, and then just a single fold seam allowance, whatever you want it to be. And then you would want 1 centimeter, 10 centimeter, and 1. So this will be 12 across. And how it's going to be added to piece B, plus you would have to hem piece B. So you fold 1 centimeter, you fold the 10, and then you stitch across. Then you would take piece C, and because piece B's seam allowance on this side is 2 centimeters, but this one is only 1, you would line up your seam allowances so that you would have the 1 centimeter showing of piece C, and then an extra centimeter of piece B showing, because it's 1 centimeter more of seam allowance. So you would sew that together, fold, and fold again, so at the end it will look like this. And because the 10 has been folded in half, that's 5 centimeter added, and then it's going to be 5 centimeter added on the opposite side, hence the 10 centimeter you removed from the width. The tutorial I have found has great diagrams. It's all in Japanese. It's not a page that could be translated, but the diagrams are just very, very straightforward. So I definitely recommend, or if you have any questions, just ask below. So the way A and B are sewn together is what confused me the most, but I eventually managed to figure it out. So in case you're confused by it like me, this is how it actually looks like. So you would have B on top of A, where you would see half a centimeter of A showing because it's a full centimeter seam allowance, and then it's covered by the 0.5 centimeter seam allowance that B has. You would then sew it across like this. Then you would fold the extra seam allowance of A on top of the seam allowance of B, and as you flip back A, it will fold in on itself, which means that the seam allowance of B is encased by A's, and then you just top stitch along. Now, if you're like me and you want the Suso yoke to have a trim, based on what I've seen on Billy Matsunega's video where she shows a Suso yoke that has a trim, it looks to me like the sides of that Suso yoke are just double folded all along. There's no side pieces. So essentially it's going to be very easy. The A is going to be exactly the same as the previous one. That has not changed. B is the same width now as A, because it's going to be the widest circumference times 1.5 plus your double fold seam allowances. And because the bottom part of the Suso yoke, so not piece A but everything under, seem to always be 70 centimeter based on tutorials I found, you then need to remove the height of the trim from the 70 centimeters to figure out how long your B is going to be. And then you obviously add the 0.5 centimeter of seam allowance at the top and your French seam allowance at the bottom. So if you have a trim that is 20 centimeters long, you need to have 50, because that would be 70 minus 20. And by the trim height, I'm not counting it with the seam allowance. I'm just counting what you want it to show. And that means that for C, it's the same width for the other two. And for the length is whatever length you have of the trim. And you just add the French seam allowance at the top. And for sewing it all together, it's the same process for this part. A French seam across. Then you just double fold, hem the sides. And that is it. And then you obviously add your straps. For the straps, I just use long strips of fabric. I think you can just use twill tape if you want. The one thing I would need to mention though is measurements again, where I feel like mine are a bit short, as in I can still tie the Suso yoke together. However, there's about that much left after the knot. And I think for me, I use the tutorials measurement of 60 centimeters. However, just in case, just start with your whole waist measurement as your strap. And then once you first try on your Suso yoke with the full waist measurement straps, just trim it, because better start longer and shorten it than having to short and be like me, where I potentially will have to replace these. Okay, so these are all the notes I made as I was doing all the undergarments to make them fit to my body. The formulas I came up with should be fitting for everyone, since they mostly use your own body measurements instead of being arbitrary length. If you want a written version of essentially everything I covered to just print out and use as you go, I made a Google Doc that you can access for free, no joining newsletter, no nothing. It has the links to all the tutorials I followed to sew the undergarments. It has all the notes I just explained in this video about getting the right measurements for your undergarments. And I also scanned the little paper diagrams I used earlier in this video, and they are all in the document as well. I'm a very visual person, and I find that these were actually quite helpful in understanding what I was doing instead of just everything written. The link to the document is in the description. If you found extra tricks on how to make the undergarments fit you, feel free to let me know, because I can then add them to the documents so that everyone can then benefit. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask, and we can figure things out together. I'm obviously not an expert in sewing kimono or kimono undergarments, but I've done a lot of research to make sure I understood the cultural aspect of kimono, also understanding how they were made and why they were made a certain way, so that when I did tweak things to fit my body, it was still keeping the essence of what the garment was supposed to look like. So the goal for February is to 1, make the hanjuban, 2, make a kimono that is going to be made out of cotton instead of the more expensive fabric I got for Otohime's kimono, and ideally, maybe, probably not, starting in some way, shape or form on Otohime's kimono, whether it's the sewing or at least the embellishing. It'd be nice to at least having made a small, tiny dent into that project, because there's still the obi, there's still the wig, there's still the skirts, and there's still 2 other costumes I want to make by the end of May. I will see you at the end of February.